Hello and welcome. My name is Glenn Kabassi and I'm the curator of a website called breedinginsects.com. And basically our website, it has been training people on how to breed insects for many years. I've been doing this for 14 years now, and we've trained a lot of groups and a lot of different organizations and individuals over the years. And we're hoping that today we can go through our online resources for you, and hopefully that's useful for you. Today we're going to look at breeding mealworms. We also do yellow and giant mealworms, but if you want other species, just because of time restraints, we'll have to stick to the one species. Now this training exercise has been organised by somebody from your group, so whoever that was, thank you very much for organising it. And the way it works is that we do free training to groups and organisations, and we take roughly an hour. It could be a bit more or a bit less. And then at the end, there's just an option to purchase books at a discount. It's obligation free. You don't have to purchase it. This is a free training exercise, but there is a lot of content that we do cover. And for those who just want, a big picture thing or just some tips and tricks, this will be very useful. For those who actually want to go into a lot more detail and a lot more information, there is that option at the end if you wish. And to just give you a bit of a background of where we started, some 14 years ago, I was a wildlife carer, and we're caring for an endangered species, a insectivorous or carnivorous marsupial called a quoll, which is this guy here. They got spots on them, a beautiful animal, but very heavy feeder on insects, and it was just costing us an absolute fortune. And I was doing bandicoots and a few other things, which were all insectivorous. And then I had my own reptile collection. Anyway, I had to breed insects to be able to do these things. Became quite proficient at it, and then we started to sell to other wildlife carers, and then we became commercial, and we sold to zoos, wildlife rescue parks, general public, anyone. And then we wrote we developed some kind of unique methods that we developed ourselves. We wrote the cricket book, a very detailed cricket book some 12 years ago, still the most comprehensive in the market, and we've just developed this online portal for mealworms. It was a big project. Just to give you an overview, we renovated a 20-foot caravan, pulled it out, completely revamped it, insulated it for climate control, benchmarked the production from no climate control to with climate control, and there'll be some good examples of the difference between climate and non-climate, which will, that experience will be quite valuable, I think. And I benchmarked everything from electricity to food consumption to output, everything like that. And we took something like 5,000 photos, hundreds of videos, and hence the book that you're going to look at. And it's only the start. Like, I've got literally so many more photos. So what you're looking at is just the start of it. I've only just released it, but I think you'll find it a very good resource. But anyway, enough of my talking. Let's get stuck into it. What I'll do now is I'm just going to switch you to share screen, and you'll be able to see what I've got there. And now you should be able to see the screen. And so basically what we've got here is, just starting from the top, we've got our introduction, a bit more about us, the benefits of breeding mealworms. That will skip. This part here is actually the section which we'll go over quite a bit, strategy and overview. And so basically it's how to design a farm. And then there's this summary section, which we talked about in terms of just an overview of all the parameters that you need to for mealworms. Choosing the right species. This is kind of a one that I'd like to focus on a little bit because it's actually quite important. I'll go into it. And then we go through which breeding method do we choose and how many mealworms can I produce, and then troubleshooting. So this one section covers a lot of what we're going to talk about. And then as we go through it, once we go into more detail, I've got a section just dedicated to breeding yellow mealworms, and we've got there the biology, how to manage pupa, and you can see how comprehensive it is. We're not going to have time to go through all this, but what we're going to do is try to pick out the juicy bits and the bits that will be useful to you. And then there's the two methods which we talk about up here, the screen method, which is for small scale, and then we have a filtering method, which is commercial. We do have a section on breeding giant mealworms, but I'm not going to cover that in too much detail. The reason being is 95% of people breed yellows. I'll give a quick overview of the difference in terms of breeding. It's not that difficult, but we will focus on yellows. And then we've got animal husbandry. We've got a section here about housing and shelving, food and water, so the dry food, the wet food. And we'll go through all this, and you can see we're very, very comprehensive. We're not, as I say, we're not going to have time for all of it, but we'll go through the important bits of, for instance, climate, etc. So let's get stuck into it. We'll start here, and we'll go to design and farm overview. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is which species do I choose? Now, this might be a peculiar question to a few people. They're kind of going, well, I'm here to breed yellow mealworms, and you know, why don't we just get stuck in that? And I'll go through just something that I learned myself. Is so we're from Australia, and I started in the caravan, and like we've been breeding mealworms for a long time. We've actually had fun, just kind of experienced this over a long period. In the hotter periods, our pupa were dying. This is for yellow mealworms. Our beetles were dying. We had low and inconsistent production rates, and we had a lot of issues with pests like mites and mold and things like that. And in contrast, in the summer periods, our giant mealworms didn't have many of those issues. So going back 18 months just before Corona, Australia had a whole bunch of bushfires. We've had, for 5 years, we've had the hottest weather on record, no guessing why. And basically, our systems just weren't coping. For 10 years, our systems in the climate that we had were doing reasonably well, but quite clearly, the temperatures have increased, and they have increased, and I know it because my systems are struggling, and we switched over to climate control about 5 years ago, and it was just amazing the difference. It just went from low productivity to really high productivity. And it was pretty much overnight. Like as soon as I put the aircon on, I had beetles that were sitting there for, this is yellow mealworms, sitting there for probably 2 to 3 weeks. The pupa was sitting there. And we turned the aircon on. The next morning it came, the whole tray was filled with beetles. Heat really affects yellow mealworms. And this is not something that a lot of people really appreciate. And the reason I mention this is because if you live in a warm temperate environment, like Australia is 2/3 is warm temperate, or you live in Florida in the US or something like that, quite often you'll get summers that are really hot and really humid, and you're going to come across these issues. And the question I have is, giant mealworms are a tropical species, and they do really well in these. And look, we've in our caravan without the aircon, we had 40 degrees, and the yellows died. And pretty much the giants did perfectly well. Other species such as crickets and cockroaches, they all love hot. They can handle up to 40 degrees quite well. But yellows do not. And that's a really important distinction that you've got to draw on the line when you're managing. And the difficulty that you have is, well, particularly in Australia, our summer is our busy time. That's when we want the mealworms. You know, all the birds, once you come to spring, you get the birds and the reptiles and the mammals are all breeding. And just at the time when you really need them, it's usually the time that the yellows crash. Now, the giants are much bigger. They're, a good 50 to 55, 5.5 centimeters, thereabouts. And the thing is, a lot of people don't like them because they grow too big. And the one thing you can do with giants is that you can breed them. They have a growth curve very similar to yellow mealworms. So what I mean is that after 3 weeks, if you have eggs of giants and you have eggs of yellows, after 3 weeks, they're about the same. And the output is about the same. And then after about 10 weeks or 12 weeks, depending on the temperature, there'll be the yellows will be fully grown, and the giants will be at the same size. So at this point, your yellows and your giants are exactly identical. And so what they're doing, you can then harvest them as you would with a yellow mealworm at that size. You don't have to let them go to a very large size. And so if you're in a warm, temperate environment, this could be a good option for many people. And also it has the advantage, if you keep them growing, they will develop for bigger animals such as mammals and big birds. Like in Australia, we've got the kookaburras and the crows and that kind of stuff. So now it is a little bit of work, but unless you're dealing with thousands of trays, I mean, literally, it takes me a minute to go through and pick out a handful of beetles, and it doesn't take that much time. And they are quite prolific breeders. That is, you don't need a huge amount of them to produce large amount. You don't need a large amount of beetles to produce a large amount of eggs. So the time I haven't found to be a major issue. So anyway, that just covers basically which species, and there's some pros and cons. And if you go into the book, there's a whole section on there which talks about the pros and the cons, which is what we've just gone through there. Now, the next thing is, what type of system do I choose? Okay, so there are two main methods. There's a small scale and a large scale method. And the first one is the screen method. And basically it has consists of a couple of trays. This is a standard tray down the bottom with a solid base. And this tray here has a screen. And basically once the beetles have laid their eggs and they hatch, so the little worms will go through that screen to down below. And this has the advantage that it's low maintenance, and basically, it takes less time. The downside is that some of the beetles are left up the top, some of the worms are left at the top here, and they do get eaten, and so it's less productive. The filtering method is a bit different. We'll go through these methods in more detail, but the filtering method, you basically separate the beetles from the substrate, and you pretty much remove 100% of all the eggs, and therefore you get a higher output, but it is more labor intensive. And so that's why most people will go with the screen method. And that's the one that we'll discuss, because unless you're going commercial, I wouldn't suggest going filtering method at the stage. But obviously the book covers both, so if you need to do both, that's that. So in terms of production rates,